The blood on Laura Jensen's dress had long since dried to a rust-brown stain, but she could still feel the weight of her husband's body in her arms as he took his last breath 3 days ago on the dusty road to Fort Bowie, Arizona. Now, sitting in the crowded saloon with desperate men eyeing her like wolves circling wounded prey, she twisted the simple gold band on her finger and tried to remember the sound of Thomas's laughter before the bandits had put a bullet through his chest for the $43 in his pocket. "You look like you could use a friend, sweetheart." The man who slid into the chair across from her reeked of whiskey and unwashed clothes, his yellowed teeth visible through a grin that made her stomach turn. "A woman alone in Fort Bowie ain't safe." "I could provide protection if you catch my meaning." Laura kept her eyes down, focusing on the warm metal of her wedding ring. It was 1878, and women without men were considered fair game in towns like this, especially when those women had no money, no family, and no prospects. She had been traveling west with Thomas to start a cattle ranch near Tucson when the attack happened. Now she had nothing but the clothes on her back, a small satchel with a few belongings, and this ring that represented 2 years of marriage and a lifetime of broken dreams. "I am not interested, sir." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The man's face darkened. "That was not a request, sweetheart." His hand shot across the table and grabbed her wrist, thick fingers squeezing hard enough to bruise. "I saw that ring of yours, pretty little thing. Probably worth a few dollars. Why do not you hand it over, and we will call it payment for my kindness in not dragging you upstairs right this second." Laura tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Panic flared in her chest as his other hand reached for her ring finger. This was all she had left of Thomas, the only physical proof that she had been loved, that her life had meant something before it all fell apart. "The lady asked you to leave her alone." The voice came from behind her, deep and calm, but carrying an edge that made the drunk man pause. Laura turned to see a tall cowboy standing a few feet away, dusty from travel, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a worn leather vest over a dark shirt, a bandana around his neck, and a gun belt that suggested he knew how to use the weapon holstered there. "This ain't your business, cowboy," the drunk man snarled, but his hand had loosened its grip on Laura's wrist. "I am making it my business." The cowboy took a step closer, and despite his quiet tone, something in his posture made every man in the saloon take notice. "Let go of her, now." The drunk man released Laura's wrist and stood, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. For a moment, she thought he might actually challenge the cowboy, but then he seemed to think better of it. "She ain't worth the trouble anyway," he muttered, shouldering past the cowboy and out into the street. Laura rubbed her wrist, feeling the phantom touch of those cruel fingers. When she looked up, the cowboy had moved closer, his expression softening. "You hurt?" he asked. "No." "Thank you for your help." She tucked her hand protectively against her chest, the ring pressing against her palm through the fabric of her dress. "I should go." "Go where?" The question stopped her because she had no answer. She had been sitting in this saloon for 2 hours, spending her last nickel on a cup of coffee that had gone cold, while she tried to figure out what to do next. There was no money for a hotel. No job prospects for a woman still wearing a dead man's blood on her bodice, and no stagecoach ticket back to Ohio, even if she wanted to return to the aunt and uncle who had disowned her for marrying against their wishes. "I will figure something out," she said, gathering her satchel and standing on legs that shook with exhaustion and grief and fear. The cowboy studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes taking in the stained dress, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she held herself together through sheer will. "My name is Dalton Winters," he said. I run a horse ranch about 5 miles south of here. I could use help with cooking and mending and such. Room and board plus a small wage. Laura's first instinct was suspicion. Men did not offer jobs to strange women without expecting something in return, and she had already learned how brutal the world could be when you had nothing left to lose. "Why would you help me?" Dalton shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable. "My sister died 6 months ago. Fever took her quick. She ran the house while I ran the ranch, and since she passed, the place has been falling apart. I burn everything I try to cook. My shirts are missing more buttons than they have, and I am down to my last pair of socks without holes." He paused. "I am not offering charity. I need help, and you look like you need a safe place to stay. Seems like we could help each other." It was the mention of his sister that decided her. The grief in his voice when he spoke of her death sounded genuine, and Laura had always been good at reading people. Thomas used to tease her about it, saying she could spot a liar from 100 yards away. The memory sent a fresh wave of pain through her chest, and she unconsciously touched her ring again. "I am Laura Jensen," she said quietly. "And yes, I accept your offer." Dalton nodded. "I have a wagon outside. Gather your things and we will head out before dark. This is all I have." She lifted the small satchel. Everything she owned in the world reduced to what she could carry in one hand. Something flickered across Dalton's face. Sympathy maybe, or understanding, but he did not comment on it. He simply gestured toward the door and followed her out into the blazing Arizona afternoon. The wagon was a sturdy working vehicle, nothing fancy, pulled by two well-cared-for horses that nickered softly as they approached. Dalton helped her up onto the bench seat with a hand that was calloused from hard work but gentle in its touch, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. Fort Bowie disappeared behind them as they headed south across the desert landscape, rocky hills rising in the distance under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. Laura found herself studying Dalton from the corner of her eye, taking in the strong line of his jaw, the way he handled the horses with easy confidence, the streak of silver at his temple that suggested he was older than she had first thought. Maybe 30, she guessed, or close to it. "How long have you been in Fort Bowie?" Dalton asked after a while, his eyes on the road ahead. 3 days. My husband and I were traveling to Tucson when we were attacked by bandits on the road. They killed Thomas for the small amount of money we had and left me alive." The words came out flat, emotionless, because if she let herself feel them, she would shatter into pieces. "I walked to Fort Bowie and have been trying to figure out what to do since. I am sorry for your loss. Everyone is sorry." She heard the bitterness in her own voice and hated it. Sorry does not bring him back. Sorry does not pay for food or shelter. Sorry is just a word people say when they want to feel like they have helped without actually doing anything. Dalton was quiet for a moment. "You are right," he said. "Words do not mean much in the face of real loss. But for what it is worth, I know what it feels like to lose someone you care about, and I know what it is like to feel like the world has become a hostile place overnight." Laura glanced at him, surprised by the honesty in his voice. "Your sister, among others." He did not elaborate, and she did not push. They were strangers, after all, bound together by circumstance and necessity rather than any real connection. The ranch appeared as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was smaller than Laura had expected but well-maintained, with a 2-story house, a large barn, and several corrals where horses moved like shadows in the fading light. Dalton pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and helped her down. "The house is nothing fancy," he said, leading her up the front steps. "But it is clean and safe. You can have the room upstairs that used to be my sister's. I sleep in the room down the hall." Inside, the house was indeed simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and floors that had been swept recently, if not particularly well. Dalton showed her around the kitchen, pointing out where supplies were kept, then led her upstairs to a small bedroom with a single bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the corrals. "I will let you get settled," Dalton said from the doorway. "If you are hungry, there is bread and some jerky in the kitchen. I need to tend to the horses before full dark." "Thank you," Laura said, and meant it this time. After he left, she sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry for the first time since Thomas died. She cried for her husband, for the future they would never have, for the children they had hoped to raise together. She cried for herself, for the frightened widow who had nearly lost the last piece of her old life to a drunk man in a saloon. And she cried because a stranger had shown her more kindness in one afternoon than the rest of the world had shown in 3 days, and she did not know how to process that kindness when everything else felt so cruel. Eventually, the tears stopped. Laura washed her face in the basin, changed into the only other dress she owned, and went downstairs to see what needed doing. If Dalton Winters was going to pay her to work, she would earn every penny. The kitchen was indeed in need of attention. The stove had not been properly cleaned in what looked like months. Dishes were piled in the wash basin, and the shelves needed organizing. Laura rolled up her sleeves and got to work, finding a strange comfort in the mundane tasks. She scrubbed and organized and inventoried supplies, making mental notes of what would be needed from town. Dalton came in as she was kneading dough for biscuits, his eyebrows rising in surprise at the transformation of the kitchen. "You work fast. I needed something to do with my hands." Laura shaped the dough and placed the biscuits in the oven. "There is not much in the way of supplies, but I can make biscuits and beans for tonight if that suits you." "That suits me fine, better than anything I would have made." He moved to the wash basin and cleaned his hands, then hesitated. "Laura, about the arrangement here. I want to make sure you understand that I am offering honest work for honest pay. You have your own room with a lock on the door if it makes you feel safer. I will not bother you or expect anything from you beyond the work we agreed on." She met his eyes across the kitchen, seeing sincerity there. "I appreciate you saying that." They ate dinner in comfortable silence, and Laura had to admit that seeing someone enjoy food she had prepared felt good after so many days of numbness. Dalton ate like a man who had been surviving on burnt meat and stale bread, cleaning his plate twice and complimenting the simple meal like it was something from a fancy restaurant. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Laura woke early to prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings cleaning, mending, and organizing the house while Dalton worked with the horses. In the afternoons, she would prepare dinner, tend to the small vegetable garden behind the house, and take care of the chickens in the coop near the barn. Dalton paid her every week, a small pile of coins that she tucked away in a tin box under her bed, and slowly Laura began to feel like maybe she could survive this after all. But at night, alone in her room, she would hold her wedding ring and remember. She remembered Thomas's proposal on a snowy Ohio evening, down on one knee in her uncle's barn with his voice shaking from nervousness. She remembered their wedding day, small and simple but perfect to her, with wildflowers in her hair and his hands warm around hers as they spoke their vows. She remembered the way he would kiss her forehead every morning and call her his lucky star, and the way he had smiled at her, even as the life drained from his eyes on that dusty Arizona road. The ring was all she had left of that life, and she guarded it fiercely. Dalton noticed her protective gesture, the way she would touch the ring whenever she was nervous or sad or lost in thought, but he never commented on it. Instead, he showed his concern in other ways, making sure she ate enough, insisting she take breaks when the desert heat grew too intense, teaching her to shoot his spare rifle in case she ever needed to defend herself. "You have got a steady hand," he said one afternoon as she hit the target for the third time in a row. "Natural talent. My father taught me when I was young," Laura said, lowering the rifle. "He believed women should know how to protect themselves. My aunt thought it was unladylike and made me stop after he died." "Your aunt sounds like a fool." Laura surprised herself by laughing, a sound she had not made since Thomas's death. "She is, rather, but she took me in after my parents died, so I suppose I owe her something for that." "You do not owe anyone anything just because they did the bare minimum of human decency." Dalton took the rifle from her and unloaded it with practiced ease. Family should be more than obligation. She wanted to ask him about his own family, about the sister he had lost, and the others he had mentioned on that first day, but the walls he had built around those memories seemed too high to scale. So instead, she asked about the horses, and he lit up in a way that transformed his usually serious face. Dalton Winters, she was learning, loved horses the way some men loved whiskey or gambling or women. He could talk for hours about bloodlines and training techniques, and the particular personality of each animal in his corrals. He treated every horse with respect and patience, never using harsh words or harsher methods, and the animals responded to him with a trust that was beautiful to watch. "You should ride," he said one day in her third week at the ranch. "I've got a gentle mare that would be perfect for you." Laura had not been on a horse since the attack. She and Thomas had been in a wagon when the bandits struck, and the thought of being up so high, so vulnerable, made her heart race with panic. But Dalton was looking at her with such hopeful enthusiasm that she found herself nodding. The mare, a pretty chestnut named Rosie, stood patiently as Dalton helped Laura into the saddle. His hands on her waist were steady and impersonal, but Laura felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear of horses, and everything to do with the realization that she had not been touched by anyone with kindness since Thomas died. "Easy now," Dalton said, adjusting the stirrups to fit her shorter legs. "Just sit deep in the saddle and let her feel your confidence. Rosie knows what to do, she just needs you to trust her." Trust, Laura thought, was in short supply these days. But she took a breath and tried to relax as Dalton led them around the corral on foot, his hand steady on the lead rope. Gradually, she began to remember the pleasure of riding from her childhood, the rhythm of the horse's gait, the sense of freedom that came from moving across the land faster than walking could take you. "You are a natural," Dalton said when they finally stopped, and the smile he gave her made her feel warm despite the desert heat. The weeks turned into a month, then two. Laura's skin browned from the sun despite her bonnet, and calluses formed on her hands from work. She learned to love the stark beauty of the Arizona landscape, the way the light changed throughout the day, painting the rocks in shades of red and gold and purple. She learned to read the weather by the shape of the clouds and the behavior of the animals. And she learned that Dalton Winters was a better man than she had any right to expect in a world that had shown her so much cruelty. He never pushed her to talk about Thomas, but he listened when she needed to share a memory. He never made her feel like a burden, even though she knew having another person in his house must have disrupted his carefully ordered solitude. And he never, not once, made her feel unsafe or treated her with anything less than complete respect. Slowly, without meaning to, Laura found her grief beginning to transform. It would never disappear completely, she knew that, but it became something she could carry rather than something that crushed her. And in the spaces where the pain receded, other feelings began to grow. She noticed the way Dalton's face creased when he smiled, the rare expression making him look younger. She noticed the gentle strength in his hands as he worked with a skittish foal, coaxing trust from fear. She noticed the way he always made sure she had the best piece of meat at dinner, the way he brought her wildflowers from the desert, the way his eyes followed her when he thought she was not looking. And she noticed, with a mixture of guilt and something like hope, that her heart had begun to beat faster when he entered a room. "I am a terrible person," she confessed to Rosie one afternoon as she brushed the mare's coat until it gleamed. "My husband has been dead less than 3 months, and I am developing feelings for another man. What does that make me?" Rosie, being a horse, had no answer, but she turned her head and nuzzled Laura's shoulder in a gesture that felt like comfort. That night, Dalton rode into town for supplies and returned after dark with a package wrapped in brown paper. He found Laura in the kitchen, where she was preparing dough for the next morning's bread, and set the package on the table in front of her. "What is this?" she asked, wiping flour from her hands. "Open it and find out." Inside the paper was fabric, a beautiful blue cotton printed with small white flowers along with thread and new buttons. Laura stared at it, her throat tightening with emotion. "Dalton, I cannot accept this." "You have been wearing the same 2 dresses for 2 months, he said quietly. "I thought you might like something new. If you hate the color or the pattern, we can exchange it, but the woman at the general store said blue would suit you." "It is perfect." Laura ran her fingers over the soft fabric, imagining it sewn into a dress that did not carry bloodstains or memories of the worst day of her life. "But it is too much. You already pay me wages. Then consider it a bonus for exceptional work." Dalton shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I just thought you deserved something nice. Thank you." The words felt inadequate for what she was feeling, the overwhelming gratitude mixed with something deeper and more complicated. "Truly, thank you." He nodded and left the kitchen quickly, as if afraid she might say something more. Laura held the fabric to her chest and let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to have a future again. She worked on the dress in the evenings, her fingers remembering the sewing skills her mother had taught her years ago. As she stitched, she found herself thinking about Dalton's sister, the woman who had lived in this room before her, who had taken care of this house and this man. What had she been like? Had she been the reason Dalton seemed so comfortable with women, treating them as people rather than property? Her name was Dorothy, Dalton said one evening when he found her sewing on the porch, catching the last of the day's light. "My sister. I realized I never told you." Laura looked up, surprised. Dalton rarely volunteered personal information. What was she like? Stubborn, smart, funny when she wanted to be. He leaned against the porch railing, gazing out at the darkening desert. "She was older than me by 3 years. After our parents died, she raised me more than I raised her, even though I tried to act like I was the one in charge. She never married, said she had seen enough of how men treated their wives and wanted no part of it. I think that hurt her, though, being alone. She would have made a wonderful mother. I am sorry you lost her." "I am sorry you lost your husband." Dalton's eyes met hers. "I know what it is like, that feeling that the world has stopped making sense." Laura set down her sewing. "How do you bear it? The loss, I mean. How do you wake up every day and keep going when someone you love is gone? You just do." He sat down on the porch steps, his back to her. "At first, you go through the motions because you do not know what else to do. You feed the horses because they are hungry. You cook meals because your body needs fuel. You sleep because exhaustion takes you whether you want it or not. And then one day, you realize that you have started living again instead of just surviving. The pain is still there, but it is not the only thing anymore. Have you reached that point? Some days. He turned to look at her over his shoulder. Other days, I wake up and forget for just a second that she is gone, and the remembering hits me all over again. But the good days are starting to outnumber the bad ones. What about you? Laura thought about it, really thought about it. I think I am starting to have good days too. That makes me feel guilty, like I am betraying Thomas's memory by being happy. Your husband would not want you to spend the rest of your life drowning in grief, Dalton said. If he loved you the way I suspect he did, he would want you to live, really live, not just exist. Did you know him? The question came out sharper than she intended, defensive in a way that surprised her. No, but I know you. And I cannot imagine anyone who had the chance to love you would be petty enough to want you to suffer forever. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Laura's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to decide what to say, what to feel, what to do with this moment that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Before she could speak, Dalton stood and headed toward the barn, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the half-finished dress in her lap. The next morning, 3 men rode up to the ranch just after breakfast. Laura was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard raised voices coming from the front yard. She quickly made her way around the side of the house and froze at what she saw. Dalton stood facing the 3 men, his stance relaxed but ready, his hand hovering near his gun. The men looked rough, the kind who made their living on the wrong side of the law, and the leader, a heavy-set man with a thick beard, was doing most of the talking. "We heard you have been buying horses from the Navajo," the bearded man said. "That is a dangerous business, Winters. Makes folks wonder if you are stealing horses yourself and trying to hide it by claiming Indian trades." "I've got bills of sale for every horse on this property," Dalton said calmly. "And if you have got accusations, you can take them to the sheriff in Fort Bowie. Otherwise, you are trespassing on my land. Maybe we just want to look around, make sure everything is on the up and up." The bearded man's eyes drifted past Dalton and landed on Laura, and his expression shifted into something predatory. "Well now, who is this pretty thing? I heard you had a woman working here. She the payment you are giving to the Indians?" Laura's blood ran cold. She took an instinctive step backward, her hand going to her wedding ring in a gesture that had become habit. "You need to leave." Dalton's voice had gone flat and dangerous. "Right now." "Or what?" The bearded man swung down from his horse, his companions following suit. "There is 3 of us and 1 of you, Winters. Maybe we will just take what we want and burn your ranch to the ground as a lesson about lying with Indians." Everything happened fast after that. The bearded man reached for his gun, but Dalton was faster, his weapon clearing leather and firing before Laura could even scream. The shot took the bearded man in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him to the ground. His companions drew their weapons, but Dalton was already moving, diving behind the water trough as bullets kicked up dust where he had been standing. Laura ran back toward the house, her mind racing. She burst through the kitchen door and grabbed the rifle Dalton had taught her to shoot, checking that it was loaded with shaking hands. By the time she got back outside, one of the men had circled around the side of the house and was taking aim at Dalton's position. She did not think, just raised the rifle and fired. The man went down with a cry of pain, clutching his leg. The sound of her shot drew the attention of the 3rd man, who turned his horse toward her with his gun raised. Laura's 2nd shot went wide, panic making her hands shake, but it was enough to make the man think twice about his odds. He fired a wild shot in her direction that shattered a window, then spurred his horse into a run, heading away from the ranch as fast as his mount could carry him. The bearded man had managed to crawl onto his horse, blood streaming from his shoulder wound, and followed his companion in retreat, leaving their injured friend writhing in the dust. Dalton emerged from behind the trough, his gun still drawn, and came toward Laura at a run. "Are you hurt? Did he hit you?" "I am fine." Laura lowered the rifle, suddenly aware that she was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. "I am fine." Dalton took the rifle from her and pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest while she tried to catch her breath. She could feel his heart pounding, smell the gunpowder and sweat and something essentially him, and she clung to him like a lifeline. "You saved my life," he said into her hair. "That man would have shot me if you had not hit him first. I did not even aim properly. I was so scared." "You still did it." He pulled back enough to look at her face, his hands coming up to cup her cheeks. "You are the bravest person I know, Laura Jensen." Time seemed to slow down. Laura looked up into Dalton's gray eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch in her throat. Want. Need. Something that mirrored the feelings she had been trying to ignore for weeks now. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and she realized she was crying without knowing when the tears had started. "Dalton," she whispered, not sure if she was telling him to stop or begging him to continue. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed his lips against hers in a kiss so gentle it felt like a question. Laura's eyes closed, and she kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt as 3 months of grief and fear and loneliness poured out of her in that single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "But I did not want to push you, did not want you to think I had brought you here for that. You have been through so much, and I knew you needed time." "I feel like I am betraying Thomas," Laura said, the words catching in her throat. "He has only been gone 3 months, and here I am kissing another man. What kind of wife does that make me? It makes you a widow who is trying to keep living." Dalton's hands were still cradling her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "There is no rule book for grief, Laura. No timeline that says when it is acceptable to start feeling again. Your heart knows what it needs, and if what it needs is to move forward, there is no shame in that. But my ring." Laura touched the gold band, her talisman against the world's cruelty. "This is all I have left of him. No." Dalton caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her ring finger just above the band. "You have your memories. You have the love you shared. You have the person you became because he was part of your life. A ring is just metal, Laura. The love it represents is in here." He touched her chest, right over her heart. "And that love does not disappear just because you find room for more." A groan from the wounded man reminded them they had more immediate concerns. Dalton quickly tied up the injured stranger and loaded him into the wagon, then drove into Fort Bowie to turn him over to the sheriff and report the attack. He insisted Laura come with him, not wanting to leave her alone at the ranch in case the other 2 men returned. The sheriff, a weathered man named Coleman, took their statements and promised to form a posse to track down the other attackers. "You did the right thing, Winters," he said. "Those boys have been causing trouble up and down the territory for months now. We will be glad to have them off the streets." While Dalton talked details with the sheriff, Laura slipped away to the general store. She had been thinking about what Dalton said, about her ring and memory, and the space in her heart for more than one love. When she found what she was looking for, she used some of her carefully saved wages to make the purchase, tucking the small package into her pocket before returning to the wagon. They drove back to the ranch in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The sun was setting as they arrived, painting the sky in those dramatic colors Laura had come to love. Dalton helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. "Laura, about what happened earlier. The kiss, I mean. If I overstepped, if you need me to keep my distance." She silenced him by standing on her toes and kissing him again, longer this time, deeper, letting herself feel the full weight of what was growing between them. When she pulled back, his eyes were dark with desire, and she felt an answering heat low in her belly. "I do not want distance," she said. "I want this. I want you. It terrifies me and I still feel guilty, but I also know that Thomas would not want me to be alone for the rest of my life. He loved me too much for that." Dalton's smile transformed his face, joy breaking through the careful control he usually maintained. "I think I am falling in love with you," he said. "Actually, I know I am. I have been falling for weeks now, watching you bring life back into this house, watching you heal from something that should have broken you, watching you be brave and strong and so beautiful it makes my chest hurt. I think I am falling in love with you too." The words felt like freedom and terror all mixed together. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again. I did not think I deserved to feel this way again. You deserve everything good this world has to offer." Dalton kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "And I want to be the one to give it to you if you will let me." Laura pulled the small package from her pocket and pressed it into his hand. "Open it." Inside was a simple silver chain. Dalton looked at it, then at her, confusion clear in his expression. Laura took a deep breath and slid her wedding ring off her finger for the first time since Thomas had placed it there. "This ring represents a love that was real and good and true," she said, threading the ring onto the chain. "But Thomas is gone, and I am still here, still living. I need to honor what we had while also letting myself move forward." She handed the chain back to Dalton. "Will you help me fasten this? I want to wear his ring close to my heart, where the love and memories belong, but I want my hand free for the future." Dalton's hands shook slightly as he fastened the chain around her neck, the ring settling against her breastbone like a benediction. When he finished, she turned to face him and held out her bare left hand. "I am Laura Jensen," she said. "I am 23 years old. I was married to a good man who died too soon. I have known real loss and real fear, and I am ready to know real love again, if you are willing to take a chance on a widow with nothing to her name but a ring on a chain and a half-finished blue dress." Dalton took her hand in both of his, raising it to his lips. "I am Dalton Winters. I am 30 years old. I have lost people I loved and spent too long closing myself off from the possibility of feeling anything again. But then a brave woman in a blood-stained dress walked into my life, and I remembered what it feels like to want something more than just surviving day to day." He met her eyes. "I would be honored to take a chance on you, Laura Jensen, for as long as you will have me." She kissed him again, and this time when she felt his arms around her and his lips on hers, there was no guilt, only gratitude for the unexpected gift of a second chance. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Laura's life. She and Dalton moved through the work of the ranch like partners, their growing love expressed in small touches and long conversations, and stolen kisses in the barn when the day's work was done. Laura finished her blue dress and wore it proudly, feeling like herself again for the first time since the attack. Dalton taught her more about working with horses, and she discovered she had a gift for it, particularly with the more skittish animals that responded to her patient, gentle approach. At night, she would stand on the porch and look out at the desert stars, her hand going to the ring that now rested against her heart. She would think about Thomas, remembering their love without the crushing weight of loss that had defined those first terrible weeks. And she would think about Dalton, about the future they might build together, and feel something like hope blooming in her chest. 3 months after the attack on the ranch, Dalton rode into Fort Bowie and returned with news that the sheriff's posse had tracked down and arrested the other two men. They would stand trial for attempted murder and a string of other crimes, and Dalton and Laura would need to testify. "Are you ready for that?" Dalton asked that evening as they sat together on the porch, his arm around her shoulders. "Going back to town, reliving what happened?" "Yes." Laura leaned into his warmth. "I am not the same person I was when those men attacked us. I'm not even the same person who arrived at your door desperate and frightened. I am stronger now, braver, and I have you beside me." Dalton turned her face toward him with gentle fingers under her chin. "Laura Jensen, will you marry me?" The question caught her completely off guard. "What? I love you. I want to spend my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. I want to build a future together, have children if you want them, grow old on this ranch watching the sunset." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small turquoise stone. "This was my mother's. Dorothy would have wanted you to have it. So I am asking, Laura, will you be my wife?" Tears streamed down Laura's face as she looked at the ring, at Dalton's hopeful expression, at the life he was offering her. 6 months ago, she had been a different person in a different life, and she would always carry that with her. But she was also this person, here and now, capable of loving again and being loved. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Dalton slipped the ring onto her left hand where it fit perfectly and kissed her until she was breathless. When they finally broke apart, Laura looked down at the turquoise and gold gleaming on her finger, then touched the ring on the chain around her neck. "2 rings," she said softly. "One for the love I lost, one for the love I found. I am so lucky to have known both." "We are both lucky," Dalton corrected, "that we found each other when we needed it most." They were married a month later in Fort Bowie, with Sheriff Coleman serving as witness and half the town turning out to celebrate. Laura wore her blue dress and wildflowers in her hair, and Dalton wore his best suit with a turquoise bolo tie that matched her ring. As they spoke their vows in the small church, Laura felt Thomas's presence like a blessing rather than a haunting, as if he was telling her it was okay to be happy again. Okay to love again. Okay to live. The trial of the 3 men who had attacked them happened 2 weeks after the wedding. Laura testified with her head high and her voice steady, describing what had happened without flinching from the difficult parts. The men were convicted and sentenced to long prison terms, and Laura felt a weight lift from her shoulders as justice was served. Life at the ranch settled into a new normal. Laura Winters, as she now was, threw herself into building the life she and Dalton were creating together. She expanded the vegetable garden, bought chickens and a milk cow, and turned the house into a true home filled with laughter and love. Dalton's horse breeding business grew as word spread about his skill and fair dealing, and together they built a reputation as honest ranchers in a territory that desperately needed more of that. A year after their wedding, Laura realized she was pregnant. She told Dalton over breakfast, watching his face transform from confusion to understanding to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around the kitchen, kissing her senseless before setting her down and immediately worrying about whether spinning was bad for the baby. "The baby is fine," Laura laughed, catching his face between her hands. "We are fine. We are going to be a family." Their son was born on a clear spring morning, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him Thomas Dalton Winters, honoring both the love that had been and the love that was. As Laura held her newborn son and looked up at her husband's tear-streaked face, she touched the ring on the chain around her neck, and silently thanked her first husband for loving her well enough that she knew how to recognize true love when she found it again. 2 years later, their daughter arrived, a tiny thing with her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. They named her Dorothy Rose, and she completed their family in a way that felt perfect. Laura would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching Dalton teach young Thomas to ride while baby Dorothy slept in her arms, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she had built from the ashes of tragedy. The wedding ring still hung on its chain around her neck, hidden beneath her dress but always present. Occasionally, someone would ask about it, and Laura would tell them the story of Thomas, of the bandits, of the desperate widow who had been saved by a cowboy with a kind heart and patient hands. She never shied away from that part of her history because it had made her who she was. But when people asked if she was happy, she would smile and look at her husband, her children, her home, and say without hesitation that she was the happiest woman in all of Arizona. She had learned that the heart was capable of holding more than one love, more than one truth, more than one version of happiness. She had learned that moving forward did not mean forgetting the past, and that honoring what had been did not prevent you from embracing what could be. 10 years after that first desperate meeting in the Fort Bowie saloon, Laura stood in the kitchen of the ranch house, watching through the window as Dalton worked with their youngest child, a spirited 7-year-old boy named Jacob, who had his father's way with horses. Thomas, now 11, was helping repair fence line with the ranch hands they had hired as the business grew. Dorothy, 9 years old and already showing signs of becoming a talented rider, was in the barn grooming her favorite mare. Laura's hand went to the ring beneath her dress, a gesture that had become less frequent over the years but never disappeared entirely. She thought about the frightened young widow she had been, clutching this ring like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. She thought about the moment in the saloon when a drunk man had tried to take it from her, and how Dalton Winters had stepped in to protect a stranger for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. That single act of kindness had changed everything. It had given her a safe place to heal, a space to rediscover herself, and eventually, a love deeper and more mature than she had thought possible. The ring had been all she had left of her first love, and Dalton had made sure no one took it from her. Not the drunk in the saloon, not the bandits at the ranch, not even time and new love. He had understood what it meant to her and protected both the ring and what it represented, giving her the freedom to hold on to her past while building a future. Dalton came through the door, dusty from work, and crossed the kitchen to wrap his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about so seriously, Mrs. Winters?" Laura leaned back against his chest, smiling at the familiar endearment. "Just remembering, just being grateful. Grateful for what? For you. For this life. For second chances." She turned in his arms and kissed him, tasting dust and sunshine and love. For a cowboy who protected a widow's wedding ring and ended up giving her so much more. Dalton smiled and pulled her closer. "Best decision I ever made bringing you home that day. Best decision I ever made saying yes." Outside, their children's laughter floated through the open window, mixing with the sound of horses and wind and the endless Arizona sky. Laura touched her ring one more time, a silent thank you to the man who had first put it on her finger, and then she let it go, turning her full attention to the man who had given her a reason to take it off. Both loves were real. Both were honored. And both had led her to this moment, this life, this perfect happiness that she had never thought possible in those dark days after Thomas's death. The sun set over the ranch in shades of gold and crimson, painting the world in the colors of promise and hope. Laura Winters stood in her kitchen with her husband's arms around her, her children safe and happy, her heart full to bursting with love, and knew that she had finally, truly come home. The ring would always be part of her story, a symbol of survival and the enduring power of love, but it was no longer all she had. Now she had everything, and it was more than enough.